Hello and welcome back. In today's video, I'm responding to a few requests that I had received asking to concentrate a little bit more on communication with native speakers, as far as both understanding and communicating again with said native speakers of English. It's geared more towards English second language students, which is totally fine because it seems like the audience that I have are ESL, so great. All right. In this video, specifically, we're going to be talking about what's known as a verb phrase. A couple of examples, and I'm sure you've heard many of them, are things like break up, take out, put on. These are just very simple phrases, which we'll talk about, that can carry up to 3, 4, or sometimes 5 meanings, depending on the way in which that verb phrase is used. All right, so we are going to take a look just at the the more nuanced view, so the structure of what a verb phrase is. On screen, you should be able to see it. It's simply a verb, so an action of some kind, followed by one or two particles. It just depends. And as a reminder, this particle, can be a preposition or it can be an adverb. A couple of examples of prepositions are out, after, before, and so on. If I wanted to be even more academic about it, I would remind you that a preposition tells you the relationship between two things in a sentence. So like I said in those examples, something could be on, or under, or beside, or inside. Those are just examples of prepositions. Whereas the adverb as a particle could be after or before, together, away, I think we have here, we have there, so they tell you the relationship where something is. So again, verb phrase, it's a verb plus one or sometimes two particles. Could be an adverb or a preposition. Okay, we got that out of the way. Let's go ahead and scroll down and take a look at the next part of a verb phrase. All right, so verb phrases can be either transitive or intransitive. What does this mean? As you see on screen, transitive is simply a verb that requires an object of some kind. So it cannot exist on its own. The verb being used requires that something act upon, or that it act upon something, right? The example I give is for the verb phrase, look up to. This particular phrase doesn't mean that you're going to be physically looking up, right? It means like you regard somebody highly. However, it's transitive and it does require an object of that phrase. So if a native speaker were to hear someone say, "Oh, I look up to," there would be a pause because we as native speakers would be waiting for you to complete that thought, right? Waiting for the object of that. So we would expect you to say something like, I look up to my father, or I look up to the creator of this business, or the inventor of so-and-so, right? So you show great admiration for that thing, whatever that object is. Opposite of that is what's known as intransitive. This is where the verb phrase itself, or the verb, can exist on its own. It doesn't require an object whatsoever. The example I give here is to grow up. So grow up as a phrasal verb means to mature, right? Or to become aged in some way. And it doesn't, again, require that object. So I could say, "Oh, it's time to grow up." Well, it's understood through context that I'm more than likely referring to myself, whether it's behavior or some other thing that needs maturing, depending on what that mutual understanding is, to grow up or to become more mature. But anywho, it can exist on its own, and again, does not require an object, which makes it intransitive. I did also want to mention that phrasal verbs, not only can they be used, the phrasal verb itself can remain the same, but the meanings can vary pretty widely, right? But they can also be transitive or intransitive depending on the use case. So just be mindful of that. All right, let's scroll down a little bit. Okay, phrasal verbs can also be separable. And like the word would suggest, separable sounds like separate. It means that it can be broken apart, right? The example I give here is to take on, which is a phrasal verb meaning to accept responsibility for, willingly, usually. So, for example, I said, I will take on the project. So I've used the phrasal verb the way it's written. I will take on, side by side, right? Whereas in the next example, I broke it up a little bit. I separated the verb take from on, right? The preposition. So I will take the project on. Now in both sentences, it's the exact same meaning. You could say either one and the person listening to you will understand exactly what you mean because they mean the same thing. Except that in one, the verb phrase was kept intact, whereas in the next it was separated, right? But the meaning is still carried forward. Not all verb phrases can be separable. However, a vast majority of them can and likely will be. So I just wanted to point that one out. Okie doke. This is a good rule too, or to know as well. So phrasal verbs are literally just multi-word verbs, okay? Because of that, you do need to be, or they play by the same rules as all other verbs, right? You need to be mindful that the verb you're using shows the correct tense, whether it's past, present, future, past continuous, things like that. You just need to be careful of its use. You can't just take it in its infinitive. You need to make sure to adapt it for the correct tense. Also, they need to match, they being the verb phrase needs to match the subject of that sentence. And the examples I give below are for the phrasal verb to give up, which means to just, essentially it just means to quit, right? Just for simplicity's sake. So in the first one I give, the subject is I give up, right? So in the present, I give up. Whereas in the next example, I have he being my subject, always gives up. So I've got the adverb always telling you about the frequency at which that person gives up, right? It's continuous. It's a habit of that person. And it's reflected by the correct tense, for the verb give. And then in the next example, or third example, I've got I've already given up, right? So I've got the past tense of the verb give. Already, I've told you it's happened. I've done it. It's in the past. I've already given up. Same exact verb phrase, but each one reflects the subject and the tense, the proper tense. So again, be mindful of those things. Just treat it like you would treat any other verb in a sentence. Okie doke. Okay, what you're seeing now is a list of examples, which I found, these are not my own. I found these from a really great website, which I'll link below. This is not an exhaustive list. And before we get into it, I did also want to let you know that it would not, as someone studying English, it would not be a wise decision to just Google verb phrases. Because what's going to end up happening is you're going to get a massive list of verb phrases, obviously, and you'll likely want to sit there because you're a good student and memorize them and try to internalize a lot of them, keeping in mind the fact that not only are there a lot of actual verb phrases, but within each verb phrase carries sometimes 3, 4, 5 meanings, so you could expand that list even further, right? And it would just be a mountain of information to absorb, most of which, I'm going to be honest, are probably not going to help you in the slightest. Verb phrases you really want to focus on are the ones relevant to the space that you're in, right? So the article you're reading or the book that you're reading. And with that said, what I recommend that you do if you're going to study verb phrases in English are to maybe pick between 1 and 10 verb phrases just to kind of start off small, write them down, and you can go into Google and search under news, right? You can search for articles in Google as opposed to the entirety of the web in the general search category. So you'd search under news, and using quotes to define the specific thing you're looking for or the exact word phrase you're looking for, I would type in the verb phrase, just one of them that you found and that you were interested in. And what's going to happen is it's going to pull up multiple articles from news sources of all kinds. So it tends to be more of formal or academic English, right, in these articles you'll likely find. So that suits you to be able to go through those articles. And I'm encouraging you to read through those articles and find where that verb phrase you searched for is being used. Because like I said, they carry multiple meanings. So you'll likely have that same verb phrase in one article used 4 or 5 different ways, right? You, as a learner of English, can challenge yourself a little bit by just parsing through some of the context of each sentence with that verb phrase to determine what the author's intended meaning or purpose for that verb phrase is. So not only are you learning that verb phrase, you're learning some of the different meanings, but organically you're starting to understand a little bit more as to how you yourself could apply something like that in your own writing or speech. It's just a tip that I have. It's one that quite a few English teachers have taught me to teach my students, because again, I've encountered a lot of good students who, great intentions, want to download a list and memorize it, but I'm telling you, it's not a good use of your time. And in fact, native English speakers, like I grew up here in the US and California, and I don't know any American student, I can't speak for everyone, but I don't know any American student that were ever taught formally verb phrases, right? We weren't given a book, we weren't given a list. These are all things that you learn through conversations, organically, in articles, in reading. You kind of pick it up. So I encourage you to do the same thing. All right, that being said, I did find this really great list just to kind of give you a few examples of the more common verb phrases you'll encounter. So if you look at the first one, you'll notice that the way that this list is set up, on the far left, you've got your verb phrase in red, and in the middle, you've got one literal meaning for that phrase. And then on the far right, it tells you how many additional meanings can be given to, or that are known for that verb phrase. So let's look at the first one, which I'll highlight as best I can. Yes, I can. Aim at, right? When you're aiming at something, you're pointing, right? It's not always a weapon like it mentions, but if you had a weapon, like if you had a gun and you were aiming it, right, you would point it at something. If you have your finger, which we all do, hopefully, you would point it or aim it at someone. If you had a laser, you could point it at someone. Or aim it, excuse me. You can use it a lot of different ways. So, for example, I was watching a commercial and it was aimed at the elderly, right? It was for, I don't know, like a high fiber drink to help people have a bowel movement. Yay. Fun visual. So when I say aimed at, I'm not saying that the commercial I watched was pointed at, the elderly or older generations. What I'm saying is it was targeting a certain demographic. Whereas I could say, he aimed at he was aiming for first place. Okay, well, in this race or competition, it's not that he was physically aiming at, a mythical first place spot. Instead, what I'm telling you is his goal or his objective, right? He aimed at something, was first place. Or you can say, he aimed his stare, or his angry stare was aimed at me. So now we're being literal, right? His stare is literally being directed towards me. And there's a lot of other meanings or ways that you could use that. We'll do one more. Another really good one is to beat up. So I'll highlight this one. So when you hear in English someone say, oh, he was beat up, depending on how it's used, but it generally means that you were physically, harassed, or you were hit or assaulted in some way, right? Like, oh my gosh, he beat him up. Well, okay, yes, they can be used that way. Or you could say, I watched a really sad movie last night, and you know what? I feel beat up. Like, oh God, it made me feel so sad that emotionally I feel, hurt, like I was beat up. So I'm not saying I was physically assaulted by the movie, I'm saying I feel beat up, like I'm kind of down, right? Like I was injured. And I suppose you could also say, oh, I went to the gym, I lifted really heavy, and now my body feels beat up. So it kind of mirrors the way you would feel if you were physically assaulted, right? You feel sore and whatnot. And we'll just kind of leave it at those two. So let me go ahead and just scroll to the top. So again, just to kind of recap, phrasal verbs are a verb, so an action, followed by one or two particles, which can be a preposition or an adverb. These verb phrases, and there are many, can have, or typically do have, multiple meanings. Just depends on the way in which the speaker or writer is intending it to be used. So context is going to be key to understanding. And as a third point as well, Oh, no, I haven't gone through all of them, sorry. They can either be transitive, which means they require an object, so the verb requires a subject or an object of some kind, or intransitive, so meaning, which would be the opposite, where they can kind of stand alone. They do not require an object of some kind. They can be separable, so they don't have to be kept intact, as it were. They can be modified insofar as you can take one part of that one part of that phrasal verb, separate it, insert another element, and then end it with the last part of that phrasal verb, like the examples I've given you on screen. And also, they need to match both the subject and the tense of the sentence they're being used in. You wouldn't be able to use them as, I guess, the infinitive. You would have to modify them to adjust and reflect, again, the tense and the subject. Alrighty, last point I want to make, which I've already said, is do not go out Googling phrasal verbs. I mean, you can, and in fact, you probably should if you want to kind of just get an idea, like a general idea of what phrasal verbs are, and to kind of remind yourself. And then maybe pick out of that list that you've decided to look at, 1 through 10 a day maybe, or whatever. And then Google, using quotes, Google News, so you can find articles, a couple of those phrasal verbs, and just read how they use it in the articles, just to get an idea of how those multiple meanings are conveyed depending on usage, right? And it's just a really good, fun way to learn English, and it's a way that we as native English speakers learn phrasal verbs. Because again, although I can't speak for everyone's experience, we're not formally taught phrasal verbs. It's taught through conversation. I hate to use that word for like the millionth time, but organically, right? We absorb it through reading, right? Which you should as well, just to kind of mirror our own experience. And yeah, just have fun with it. Using phrasal verbs, which appear all the time in conversation, will actually help you not only understand, but communicate more like a native speaker as well. Just be mindful of the meanings and the context, because some things can go very wrong. All right, I hope you guys have a great day. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, sorry. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Continue to leave comments, offering suggestions or something that you would like to see, much in the same way that someone wanted to see this video, so here I am. I really do appreciate it, and it would help me grow and expand. Any tips you have, any critiques, I would appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, and I hope you guys have a great day as I stop the video. All right.